All right. Okay. Let me go ahead and share the screen. Today, I'm going to talk to you about this idea of motivation in textbooks. So let me get this going. I'm sorry about that. Screen two, share. Okay. We're going to look at this idea of engaging students as readers, what motivates students to read, but we're going to frame it in talking about what role might textbooks have in actually kind of diminishing students' motivation to read. So we're going to identify why it is important to focus on student motivation and engagement in a literacy classroom. We're going to explore how the use of textbooks may actually limit and work against our interests as a teacher. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to ask you is just simply this: what motivates you personally? For some of you, you're probably motivated by a intrinsic desire to learn. Others might be motivated because you paid a lot of money to get to your school. Some of you might be motivated because you really enjoy being in classes with friends, or you really enjoy working with younger students, and so you want to do well in a class that prepares you for that. We're motivated by different things, and it's really important for us to understand motivation is actually a complex thing. So when we talk about motivating our students, especially motivating them to read, we want to think about this in a continuum, and we want to think about it in a number of different sort of contexts. So for us, a working definition for motivation is the reason or reasons for acting or behaving in a particular way. So for us for purpose of this class, what are the reason or reasons our students may have for reading or perhaps not reading, right? So two ideas that we want to put into our forefront when we're talking about motivation with students and student readers is the first idea is trait versus state. If our students see themselves as being good readers, or as being good at history, or at being good at math, they may come in with this idea that they are certain to achieve, right? They have experience with achievement. They come in with a sort of a trait of motivation. Very few of your students are going to be like that. It would be nice if more of them were. But really, the problem with that permanency is that motivation, if a student believes that motivation is something that either you have or you don't have, the problem becomes then that the first time that student becomes unmotivated for whatever reason, it kind of all falls apart, right? If we think of motivation in terms of state, and we help our students to see motivation in terms of state, what that means is that a situation can cause us to become motivated. So a student can come into my math classroom, tell me that they're not very good at math, and I can create a state in which they can become motivated. It might not be consistent, might not be every time, might not be 180 days that they walk through my classroom doors. But if I see motivation as a state, and I help them to see it as a state, I can help them to see, no, I can get you to motivated in here. So states are temporary, traits are permanent, and we want our students to understand that they can in fact become motivated by situations. The other thing we want to think about is intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. I think we all as educators really want our students to value that intrinsic. We want them to seek out challenges and use their interests and their inner beliefs to be able to learn. Fact of the matter is, sometimes our students are going to need extrinsic motivation, which means that the motivation comes from outside or from some sense of gain. Sometimes that gain can be things like rewards and prizes. Sometimes those gains can be things that can try to get our students to value something intrinsically. So like when we create motivation by maybe discussions and creating a social learning environment, what we're doing is we're using that intrinsic motivation. You want to be part of the group, you want to be part of the discussion, to hopefully help them to turn that into something that they value and have an interest on their own. So Motivation is determined by goals, right? And that's one thing that we need to think about. Our students need to feel like whatever we're asking them to do, whatever our goal is, that it is achievable. Okay. So goal orientation is something that we really want to think about. And when we tell our students that we want them to be goal oriented, there are different ways that the different goals that they could have in their mind. And so we want to think about that. The two most useful in my mind as an educator are the ones that I have in bold, okay? So one goal orientation would be that a student wants to master something. They want to improve and they want to learn. I want to master this. I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to master it. So that's a goal orientation. Another goal orientation that that students might have, and you're going to get these students are the ones that are always worrying about grades, right? They're going to be performance oriented. They want to demonstrate to others what they know. Students that come from homes that give them a lot of pressure might have that performance orientation. And while you want to use it in the classroom to your advantage, you also want to be careful that you don't abuse it. Those students can often be the ones that we can motivate for all the wrong reasons and in a way that turns them away from the learning in the end. Because really what they start to worry about is more whatever that performance goal is than the actual learning. So I need to do good on the test, not I want to learn this content, right? Another goal that we might have from our students that that is out there is work avoidance. If our students don't think that they can achieve something, they might be motivated to just give as little effort as possible, right? So work avoidance is a goal. It's not a good goal. It's not a goal we want to move our students towards, but we need to be aware of. And then another goal that I think is especially useful in the secondary classroom is a social goal, which is this idea of becoming part of a group and belonging. That's why we have so much of an emphasis on collaborative learning, because we know that that is a way to orient our students towards a goal that will help them to learn. So what we know then is the process matters. How we teach our students and how we focus them on goals matters. So the more we can focus our students on mastery orientation, the more we can start to motivate them, build in that intrinsic motivation. So we need to give our students lots of opportunities to identify growth, improvement, to be able to see their progress towards a larger class goal. And so we want to really think about how we as teachers, when we're introducing reading, how are we helping our students to come to this mastery orientation? And part of that is how are we giving our students reading that they both want to engage with and that they feel that they can master or learn from, right? So that's really important. What we put in front of our students really does matter. So what we want to do is want to kind of pull this together, and there's a model for student motivation that I want us to consider and have in our lens when we're in our classroom, which is target. So we want to think about things like task, authority, recognition, grouping, evaluation, and time. Well, what does that mean in a literacy classroom? Task, we want to use a variety of activities that are challenging, organizing, and are perceived by students as useful and interesting. So this is why when you guys have your text set assignment in class, you're going to use a variety of different types of texts in the classroom, because we know that variety and relatedness, purposefulness, a feeling of intentionality in those different activities will actually help our students to target their goals in the right direction. Authority, we want to cede authority to our students as much as possible. We want them to be responsible for their own learning. We want to give them choices. We want them to make decisions. We want them to put them in leadership roles. So we want to put them into literature circles where they're kind of bringing their own reading. We might want to introduce choice models into the classroom. We want as much as possible for our students to develop that agency on their own reading. Recognition, we want to give students authentic feedback that can help build their confidence. We want to recognize their efforts and their growth. So students need to be able to see that they are in fact learning, even if they haven't hit whatever that goal might be in the learning targets, right? They're making progress towards it, and it's very important that they see that progress. Grouping is another thing, because as I talked to about the social nature of students, so being intentional and grouping in ways that promote cooperation and collaboration that incentivize students to read so that they can contribute to the group. That's another thing that is really important. Evaluation would mean that we want to use a variety of assessments to determine progress, improvement, and mastery. I like to use the example of my daughter, who got a perfect score in the reading section of the ACTs, not the ACT overall, but she would go into her anatomy class and she would constantly fail the reading quizzes. And it drove me crazy. And when we were talking about it, what we came to understand, it was that the way that the reading was being assessed was just one very specific kind of approach to the assessments, and Katie just wasn't able to demonstrate what she was learning through her reading through that one kind of assessment. I also think maybe she had a little senioritis, but that's a different story. And then the last one is timing. We want to give students the opportunity to plan, to make schedules. We don't want to rush the reading, but we also don't want to take too long in the reading, right? So you don't want to give your students too much reading in one night, but you also don't want to, like I used to, when I was an instructional coach, I used to talk to some teachers would have, like, they would teach Hamlet for an entire quarter. And I said, well, you're teaching a play that takes 3 hours to perform, and you're taking 9 weeks to teach it. That's boring for the students, right? So timing is kind of really key, okay? I'm going to show you this. We're just going to do a couple of minutes of this, but I'm going to show you this video. This is from Penny Kittle, who is somebody who has introduced a lot of choice-based models. And what she did was she used to teach high school. She's now teaching a remedial reading class at a college near her hometown. And she talked to her students in their remediation reading class about their experiences. And what you'll see, I think, and I want us to go back to that target model, what you'll see is there's a lot of reasons, a lot of things that unmotivated students in their reading. Okay, so let me share this.
In high school, did you do the required reading?
No.
Like any of it?
None.
None of it?
None.
Wow.
I think I read probably 2.
Out of 3 years?
Me too.
Out of the 3 years, probably 4 or 5. But 2 that I can remember actually reading.
I didn't really do it.
Did you do any of it?
Fast Food Nation, I skimmed the first chapter and then I put it down because it was boring.
Probably.
Oops.
Kind of base what I said off other people. My comments would be sort of what they said in different words. And SparkNote analysis is pretty good.
I would spark every one of them because the books were terrible.
Well, last year we used to have discussions in class, so I just listened to what everybody else is saying, and then when it came time to write the essay, I'd do that, so I know where to skim in the book, and then if I felt like it, I'd spark it.
Well, this really gets back to the American dream, and you just make a bunch of stuff up.
SparkNotes were a good friend of mine.
I'm pretty good at hearing what everyone else says and then putting it all together.
SparkNotes helped.
SparkNotes.
Usually SparkNotes, we're asking a friend.
SparkNotes.
SparkNotes.
I pretty much just, we would have lots of class discussions and I would just listen to what other people would say. Pretty much SparkNotes are my best friend.
Usually, I would skim until I couldn't take it anymore, and then I would SparkNote it.
I'd just ask somebody who SparkNote.
Guns up in 8th grade.
Only Harry Potter a long time ago.
In middle school, I read. High school, stopped.
The last one I remember reading was freshman year, A Million Little Pieces, which turned out to be a lie, so.
Probably 8th grade.
6th grade was Lucky Bones, that was the last one I finished.
I guess most of the books that we read were a little dull, and I think people that don't like reading are immediately turned off by them, and it creates a big problem.
I'm reading this right now. Stop in the Pants, and that's definitely not something that would be on the curriculum in English.
it's fun and I like reading it. If you're interested in what you're reading, you're gonna want to read more. If you're not interested, like I didn't want to read To Kill a Mockingbird because I wasn't interested in it, so I didn't want to keep reading. But last night I read like 150 pages of this because I was just interested.
So far,
Okay, I'm gonna stop there because you get the idea. But if we look at this from a target standpoint, we can see that by allowing students to engage with challenging texts and having a variety of different kinds of texts, what she's doing, right, is she's creating a goal orientation. The students have choice. They were counting their own pages. They were responsible for their own reading. They were able to build confidence, right? You could see that in their exchange with the teacher who was the one that was videotaping it. We didn't see the example of the grouping, but we did see things like a variety of assessments to determine progress. When the student said, I read 150 pages, what that tells me is she knows that that's progress. She's not saying I read 150 pages of a complex text, but she's telling us, you know, that she did. And then giving time for students. If you watch more of the video, you'll see them talking about things like starting a book and stopping it because they didn't like it, and giving permission for that, which means that the teacher was carving out time for the students. Instead of marching them through on a schedule, each of the students kind of were doing the reading on a schedule that was appropriate for each of them. So let's go that again. I don't know why I always end up. So pulling this together and thinking about the reading that you're going to do and thinking about the video, what role might textbooks have in doing exactly what was happening to the students in their high school experience, demotivating them from learning? Before I go anywhere to talk about why textbooks need to be used carefully, I do want to say one thing that I think is really kind of an interesting idea, but actually textbooks are known to have a lot of errors. So we have, this is an example of many similar studies where one of the things you want to know as a teacher, you need to be very critical of your instructional material, and you need to think very carefully when you're using them because you might actually find errors. I know math teachers are constantly telling me that they're finding errors in their math textbooks. That's one thing. We don't want to cede all authority as teachers to our textbooks. Sometimes the order that they put things in makes no sense. Sometimes the facts that they give are maybe skewed, out of date, or just flat out wrong. So we want to think about that, okay? But one of the things that definitely makes textbooks difficult to read is we know that textbooks tend to be pretty dense. So this is a model of text complexity, and these are all the things that can make a text complex. Textbooks tend to be complex over here in this quantitative area, especially by high school, which means that they have what we would call a high lexile level, which means that they have, which is an algorithm, I always say it wrong, algorithm that is presented. It's the text is put into a computer. The computer looks at things like how many multisyllabic words does it have, how long are the sentences, how dense is the passage. And so this would be what we would call a quantitative measure. So it spits out a lexile number. And a lot of textbooks are actually going to be on grade level or even a little bit above grade level. Okay, so that's the quantitative. But that's not the only thing that makes a text complex. Qualitative things matter as well, which means the content itself, the complexity of the ideas being presented, the appropriateness of the material. So an example I give is one book that I used to teach to 10th graders was The Bluest Eye, which is at lexile level of 5 or 6. It's a Toni Morrison book, but that book is actually very complex. It has a rape scene in it. It has a really, really intense discussion of racism, of entrenched poverty, psychological abuse, all of those things. So I would say, even though the quantitative measures were pretty low, qualitatively it was a very complex text, and certainly nothing that you would put in front of a 5th or a 6th grader. And then the last thing is this reader and task idea. So this is where, you know, a lot of times I think we as teachers make the mistake of saying rigor has to mean that it's going to be quantitatively very difficult, high lexile level, right? Very rigorous text. But the fact of the matter is we could put in front of our students the most simple text, but if we're giving them a complex task, or if our reader has very limited knowledge of the ideas being presented, that could actually make that what we perceive as being a simpler text that could actually make it a very rigorous experience for our students. So we get a chance to kind of balance out the qualitative and the quantitative measures, okay? All right. Another thing we want to think about with textbooks, sorry about that, is background knowledge. I put the baseball picture up here to remind us of the couple of lectures ago when we were talking about the research into, or the study where students who were lower achieving readers actually outperformed their higher achieving classmates if they had high knowledge of baseball and their classmates had low knowledge of baseball. Background knowledge matters. So as we're using and introducing a textbook in our classroom, we want to think about what is being assumed. What does a textbook assume my students know? And how can I make sure that they actually know that, right? Is there vocabulary? Is there knowledge and content that is assumed? So those are things that I want you to be thinking about, and not just say read a chapter, right? Because reading a chapter might require you to do a little mini lesson on an idea or a concept, or have them front load some vocabulary for them because they are coming in without that background knowledge. Another thing is that we don't always think about is that textbooks actually read very differently, right? If you read a nonfiction trade book, you read a piece of literature, you read it straight through, right? But a textbook is a genre in and of itself. It has some pretty unique things. Students need how to learn how to take advantage of some of the parts of a textbook, like a table of contents, a glossary. Textbooks tend to use a lot of graphics, and students might need help on how to read graphics. Math and science people really can help our students build that visual literacy by taking time. A lot of times, you know, keywords, key idea, pull out boxes, things like that. Helping our students navigate how to read a textbook and helping them to understand how those different aspects can support them. That's something that we want to think about. So whether it's read alouds or, you know, asking them to hunt and find aspects of, you know, like actually introducing the textbook early on so they can see the different parts of the textbook, scavenger hunt of your textbook, things like that, but really being explicit to help our students to understand a textbook. And then the last thing is making sure we're pairing our textbooks with authentic texts from the things that really engage people within our discipline. Are we giving our students opportunities to think like a historian, think like a scientist, think like a musician, think like a mathematician, think like a physical education or health advocate, right? And if it's hard for us to say that the textbooks are really the most authentic text that we can put in front of our students. So we need to balance the use of textbooks with the use of authentic texts that can really help our students apprentice within our disciplines, and are much more likely to, going back to here, are much more likely to help our students target their learning and be motivated by what we are doing in the classroom. So, all right, I'm gonna stop here and hope you all have a good week.